house was perfect, the neighborhood idyllic, my husband, Ben, the picture of suburban success. We had the life everyone envied. But the drawn blinds on his backyard workshop, the late hours he kept out there, the faint, unsettling sounds, they planted a seed of doubt. One moonless night, drawn by an unease I couldn't shake, I crept to the living room window overlooking the yard. What I saw through a gap in those blinds wasn't just shocking, it was monstrous. It shattered my reality, plunging me into a nightmare where the man I loved might be a monster. You won't believe the horror I uncovered. The rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall was usually a comforting sound, the steady heartbeat of our tranquil suburban home. Tonight, however, it sounded like a countdown, each tick amplifying the gnawing anxiety twisting in my gut. Ben was out in his workshop again. He'd been spending nearly every evening out there for the past month, long after the respectable lights in neighboring houses blinked out. Our home, a charming Cape Cod nestled on a tree-lined street, was the epitome of the life I'd always thought I wanted. Polished hardwood floors, a kitchen gleaming with stainless steel, a garden blooming with carefully tended hydrangeas. And Ben was the cornerstone. Handsome, successful in his vaguely defined consulting business, attentive in that slightly distracted way successful men often are. We'd been married for 12 years, a comfortable, predictable partnership. Or so I'd believed. The change had been subtle at first. More late nights supposedly catching up on emails. More hushed phone calls taken on the patio. A new lock installed on the door of the detached workshop at the bottom of the garden, a space previously used for storing lawn equipment and forgotten hobbies. He'd waved it off, claiming he needed absolute focus for a sensitive new project, needing to protect proprietary information. It sounded plausible, logical even. Ben was nothing if not logical. But then came the sounds. Faint at first, easily dismissed as the wind or neighborhood noise. A low hum, sometimes a muffled thud, occasionally something that sounded disturbingly like scraping. I'd asked him about it once, casually, over dinner. He'd frowned, claiming he hadn't heard anything. Maybe the old plumbing was acting up. He'd changed the subject quickly, his eyes avoiding mine. That was another change. The avoidance. The way his gaze sometimes skittered away from mine. The way he seemed jumpy, easily startled. He blamed stress, the demands of his clients, the long hours. I'd tried to be supportive, offering back rubs he shrugged off, suggesting weekend getaways he claimed he was too busy for. The distance between us grew, an invisible wall built brick by careful brick. Tonight, the unease was a physical ache. He'd barely touched his dinner, his answers to my questions monosyllabic, his eyes darting towards the window that overlooked the backyard, towards the workshop. As soon as the dishes were cleared, he'd retreated out there, locking the door behind him with a decisive click. I tried to read, to watch television, to lose myself in the mindless chatter of a reality show. But the silence from the workshop felt louder, more ominous than any noise. The drawn blinds were absolute, not a sliver of light escaping, adding to the sense of secrecy, of something hidden. What sensitive project required such complete darkness, such utter isolation? Around 11, the low hum started again. A deep vibration I could almost feel through the floorboards. It settled beneath my skin, a discordant note in the quiet symphony of the night. I stood up, drawn by an invisible thread, and walked to the large bay window in the living room. It offered a clear, albeit distant view of the workshop. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the backyard in deep shadow. The workshop stood like a silent sentinel, its windows dark squares against the pale siding. Except one wasn't completely dark. On the side facing the house, a small sliver of light escaped from a tiny gap where the blind didn't quite meet the sill. My heart began to pound. I shouldn't look. It was his private space. Invading his privacy was wrong. But the suspicion, the fear that had been coiling inside me for weeks, urged me forward. I needed to know. I needed to see what Ben was doing in there, locked away in the dark. Creeping closer to the window, I pressed my face against the cool glass, straining my eyes to see through the darkness and into that sliver of illicit light. The angle was awkward, the view obstructed by bushes. I shifted, moving silently to the edge of the window frame, finding a slightly better vantage point. My breath hitched. I could see inside, just a narrow slice of the workshop's interior, but enough. Enough to see Ben. He wasn't working on a computer. He wasn't examining blueprints. He was standing over a large, stainless steel table, his back mostly to me, his movements precise, focused, and in his hands, something glinted under the single, harsh spotlight, illuminating the table. Something sharp, metallic. My blood ran cold. The glint of metal, the focused intensity of Ben's posture. The sterile-looking steel table, bathed in that single, harsh light. It wasn't the scene of a consultant working on a project. It felt clinical, illicit, deeply unsettling. What was he doing? I stayed frozen at the window, barely breathing, my eyes glued to that narrow sliver of illuminated workshop. Ben moved with a disturbing efficiency, his hands working quickly, purposefully. He seemed completely absorbed, lost in whatever task he was performing. He wiped down the steel table with a cloth, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. Then he reached for something just outside my line of sight. A faint scraping sound drifted across the yard, carried on the night air. It was the same sound I'd heard before, the one I'd tried to dismiss. Now, hearing it while watching Ben's focused movements, it took on a sinister quality. Scraping what? Polishing metal? Sharpening something? My mind conjured horrifying images, each more disturbing than the last. He leaned back over the table, his body blocking my view for a moment. When he straightened up, he was holding something small, dark, and irregularly shaped. He examined it closely under the light, turning it over and over in his hands. Even from a distance, I could see the concentration etched on his face. It wasn't the look of a man stressed about work. It was something else, something colder, more detached. He placed the object carefully back on the table and picked up the metallic tool again. A scalpel? A specialized knife? He bent over the table once more, his movements becoming even more precise, more delicate. It looked like he was dissecting something, cutting into it with meticulous care. Nausea rose in my throat. This couldn't be happening. My husband, my steady, logical Ben, couldn't be involved in something so grotesque. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a hobby, taxidermy, model building, something unconventional but ultimately harmless. But the secrecy, the locked door, the late hours, the strange sounds, his jumpy behavior, it all painted a picture far darker than any innocent hobby could explain. And the feeling I got watching him, it was primal, a gut-level certainty that something was terribly wrong. Suddenly he stopped. He straightened up abruptly, his head snapping towards the window, towards the house, towards me. I recoiled instinctively, stumbling back from the window, my heart leaping into my throat. Had he seen me? Could he possibly know I was watching? The light from the workshop was bright, but the living room was dark. Surely he couldn't have seen me pressed against the glass. I held my breath, listening. Silence. The low hum from the workshop ceased. Had he turned off the light? Was he coming to the house? My mind raced. I needed to get back to bed, pretend I'd been asleep all along. If he confronted me, I had to feign ignorance, deny everything. Moving on trembling legs, I crept back towards the bedroom, glancing nervously over my shoulder at the dark windows. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like an approaching footstep. I slid back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, forcing my breathing to even out, mimicking sleep. Minutes crawled by, each one stretching into an eternity. I listened intently for the sound of the back door opening, for Ben's footsteps on the stairs. Nothing. Had I imagined him looking up? Had my own fear projected my presence onto him? Or was he still out there, in the darkness, aware that his secret sanctuary had been breached? Eventually, exhaustion began to outweigh fear. My eyelids grew heavy, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. Just as I was drifting into an uneasy sleep, I heard it. The soft click of the workshop door opening, then closing. Footsteps crossing the lawn, then the back porch. The sound of the key turning in the back door lock. Ben was back inside. I squeezed my eyes shut, feigning deep sleep, my body rigid beneath the covers. I heard him move through the downstairs rooms, the familiar sounds of him locking up, turning off lights. Then his footsteps ascending the stairs, slower, heavier than usual. He paused outside the bedroom door. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was he going to come in? Was he going to confront me? The doorknob turned slowly. The soft click of the bedroom door opening sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I remained perfectly still, my breathing shallow, eyes squeezed shut, praying my charade of sleep was convincing. Ben stood silhouetted in the doorway for a long moment, the faint light from the hallway outlining his frame. Was he watching me? Could he tell I was awake, my body thrumming with fear? He didn't speak. After what felt like an eternity, he stepped quietly into the room, closing the door gently behind him. I heard the soft rustle of his clothes as he undressed in the darkness, the familiar sounds now imbued with a terrifying new significance. What secrets did those clothes hide? What traces of his gruesome work clung to the fabric? He slid into bed beside me, the mattress dipping under his weight. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the faint, metallic tang that seemed to cling to his skin beneath his usual soap scent. It wasn't unpleasant, but tonight it made my stomach churn. Was it blood, chemicals, or just my overactive imagination? He lay still for a long time, his breathing unnaturally even, almost controlled. Was he pretending to sleep too? Was this some kind of silent standoff, both of us aware of the truth hanging unspoken between us? The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the frantic beating of my own heart. I couldn't bear it. The pretense, the proximity, the terrifying uncertainty. It was too much. I had to know. Had he seen me? Did he suspect? Slowly, cautiously, I allowed my breathing to deepen slightly, mimicking the transition into sleep. I shifted, turning onto my side, facing away from him, a subtle movement that might suggest restlessness in slumber. He didn't react immediately. Then I felt it, a light touch on my shoulder. I flinched involuntarily, my body tensing despite my efforts to remain still. Sarah? His voice was a low whisper in the darkness, unnervingly calm. Are you awake? My mind raced. Deny it? Confess? What was the safer option? I murmured, making my voice thick with feigned sleep. Was wrong. He didn't reply for a moment. I could feel his gaze on my back. Intense, probing. Nothing, he said finally, his voice smoother now, almost reassuring. Just couldn't sleep, thinking about work. Work, the convenient excuse, the shield he hid behind. Was he testing me? Trying to gauge my reaction? Stress, I mumbled, burying my face deeper into the pillow. Try to relax. His hand remained on my shoulder, his thumb gently stroking the fabric of my nightgown. The gesture, once comforting, now felt menacing, proprietary. It was as if he was marking his territory, reminding me of my place. You seemed restless earlier, he continued, his voice still low, conversational, yet underscored with a chilling intensity. Did you get up? My blood ran cold. He had seen me, or at least he suspected. Bathroom, I mumbled, keeping my voice slurred with sleep. Thirsty. He was silent again. The weight of his hand felt heavier, almost possessive. Everything okay, Sarah? He asked, the question hanging in the air like a threat. You seem tense lately. You have no idea, I thought frantically. Just tired, I whispered. Long week. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry a world of unspoken meaning. He finally removed his hand from my shoulder, the release of pressure leaving my skin tingling with residual fear. He shifted, turning onto his back, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. We lay there in silence, side by side, yet miles apart. Two strangers sharing a bed, bound together by years of shared history, and now separated by a terrifying secret. The darkness seemed to press in, amplifying my fears. What was Ben capable of? What horrors unfolded in that locked workshop? And was I safe lying next to him? Sleep eventually claimed me, but it was a fitful, nightmare-ridden slumber. I dreamt of glinting scalpels, shadowy figures, and the chilling scrape of metal on metal. I woke with a start just before dawn, gasping for breath, my heart pounding, the horrifying images still vivid in my mind. Ben was already gone. Not unusual for him to leave early, but today, his absence felt ominous. I crept out of bed and went to the window. The workshop blinds were tightly drawn, revealing nothing. But the padlock was gone. He hadn't relocked it after coming in last night. Was it an oversight or an invitation? A challenge? The missing padlock wasn't just an oversight. It felt like a deliberate act, a gauntlet thrown down. Was Ben testing me? Did he want me to go inside to uncover the truth he so carefully concealed? Or was it a trap, a way to gauge just how much I suspected, how far I was willing to pry? My mind warred with itself. Every instinct screamed at me to stay away, to pack a bag, call the police, run as far and as fast as I could. The images from the night before, the glinting metal, the sterile table, The focused intensity of Ben's actions were burned into my memory, whispering of unimaginable horrors. But another part of me, the part that still clung to the illusion of the man I thought I knew, the part desperate for a rational explanation, urged me forward. Maybe it was a harmless hobby. Maybe the scraping sound was wood carving, the steel table for intricate model assembly, the scalpel a precision tool for detailed work. Maybe the secrecy was just Ben being Ben, overly protective of his process. If I went inside, if I saw for myself, maybe my fears would be laid to rest. Or maybe they would be confirmed beyond my wildest nightmares. The uncertainty was agonizing. Living with this suspicion, this constant fear, was becoming unbearable. I had to know the truth, no matter how ugly. Waiting until I was certain Ben was gone for the day, his car pulling out of the driveway, heading towards the city, I made my decision. My hands trembled as I walked across the dew-kissed lawn towards the workshop, the morning sun feeling unnervingly bright, exposing my clandestine mission. The unlocked door felt heavy, resistant, as if warning me away. I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the soft creak of the hinges. The interior was dim, the blinds still drawn, but enough ambient light filtered through for me to see. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Antiseptic. Clinical. With a faint, underlying metallic tang, the same scent I'd detected on Ben last night. It wasn't the smell of wood shavings, or paint, or any normal hobbyist's materials. It smelled like a laboratory. Or worse. My eyes adjusted to the dimness. The workshop was meticulously organized, almost sterile. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, but they weren't woodworking tools or modeling supplies. They were clamps, forceps, strange-looking probes, and yes, an array of scalpels and knives of varying sizes, gleaming ominously in the dim light. In the center of the room stood the stainless steel table I'd seen through the window. It was wiped clean now, reflecting the faint light, but I could almost imagine Ben standing over it, engrossed in his gruesome work. Beside the table was a large, industrial-looking freezer, humming quietly. My stomach clenched. What could possibly require a freezer that size in a workshop? My gaze swept the room, searching for clues, for anything that might explain Ben's activities. Stacked neatly in one corner were several sturdy black plastic containers with tightly sealed lids. They looked like the kind used for transporting hazardous materials. What was inside them? Dread coiled in my stomach, cold and heavy. I didn't want to know, but I had to. Taking a deep breath, I approached the nearest container. It was unexpectedly heavy. With trembling fingers, I pried open the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dry ice, were several sealed plastic bags. And inside the bags, my breath caught in my throat, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. They weren't animal parts. They weren't modeling supplies. They were human organs, kidneys, livers, perhaps a heart, neatly preserved, labeled with cryptic codes and dates. Nausea overwhelmed me. I stumbled back, gagging, my vision swimming. This wasn't a hobby. This wasn't taxidermy. This was something monstrous, something unimaginable. My husband, my quiet, logical Ben, was involved in the illegal organ trade. Black market harvesting? Trafficking. The implications were horrifying. The scraping sound. Was it bone? The glinting tools. surgical instruments, the freezer for preservation. It all clicked into place, forming a picture so grotesque it defied belief. I backed away slowly, desperate to escape the horrifying reality contained within those four walls. I needed to get out, call the police, expose him. As I reached the door, my hand trembling on the knob, I heard a sound from outside. Footsteps on the gravel path, coming closer. My blood turned to ice. Ben. He wasn't gone. He was coming back. Panic, stark and blinding, seized me. There was nowhere to hide in the sterile, organized workshop. The single door was my only exit, and Ben was just outside, his footsteps crunching ominously on the gravel. Trapped. The word echoed the horrifying reality of my situation. My eyes darted around the room, searching desperately for a weapon, a hiding place, anything. The gleaming scalpels on the pegboard seemed to mock me. The heavy freezer offered no refuge. The black containers held horrors I couldn't bear to look at again. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Silence. Was he listening? Did he know I was inside? The missing padlock. It hadn't been an invitation. It had been bait. He'd known I would come looking. He'd planned this. The doorknob turned slowly, deliberately. The door swung open, revealing Ben silhouetted against the bright morning light. His face was unreadable, his eyes cold, devoid of the warmth I thought I knew. He wasn't the slightly distracted, logical husband I'd lived with for 12 years. This was someone else. A stranger. A monster. He stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him, plunging the workshop back into dimness. He didn't seem surprised to see me there, surrounded by the evidence of his grotesque secret. If anything, there was a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "Sarah," he said, his voice unnervingly calm, level. "I wondered when your curiosity would finally get the better of you." My voice was trapped in my throat, choked by fear. I could only stare at him, my mind struggling to reconcile the man standing before me with the husband I thought I loved. "Looking for something?" he continued, taking a slow step towards me. He gestured vaguely around the workshop. "Or did you just want a closer look at my project?" "Ben, what is this?" I finally managed to whisper, my voice trembling. "What are you doing?" He smiled then, a chilling, humorless curve of his lips. "Isn't it obvious? I'm providing a service, Sarah. A very lucrative, very necessary service." "Service?" I repeated, incredulous. Those are human organs, Ben." "Precisely," he replied, his voice matter of fact. "Sourced discreetly, preserved meticulously, delivered to clients who are willing to pay handsomely for a second chance at life, or at least a longer one. Supply and demand, darling. Simple economics." The casual way he spoke, the utter lack of remorse, was horrifying. He spoke of human body parts as if they were commodities, inventory in his macabre business. "But where do you get them?" I whispered, dreading the answer. His smile widened. "That's proprietary information, Sarah. Trade secrets. Let's just say there are unfortunate souls whose passing goes unnoticed, or people desperate enough to make donations. Opportunities arise for those willing to look. The implication hung heavy in the air. Was he just a broker, or was he involved in the sourcing? Had he killed people? The thought was too monstrous to comprehend, yet the evidence surrounded me. You're a monster, I breathed, backing away slowly towards the wall. Am I? He countered, taking another step closer. He wasn't rushing, his movements deliberate, predatory. Or am I just a pragmatist? I saw a need, a market inefficiency. I filled it. The money has afforded us this beautiful house, this comfortable life you enjoy so much, Sarah. Doesn't that count for something? He gestured again, this time towards the containers. Think of the good I'm doing in a way. These parts give people hope, extend lives. Isn't that a noble goal, ultimately? His twisted logic, his attempt to justify the horror, made me feel sick. It's illegal, Ben. It's grotesque. It's evil. Labels, he scoffed. Morality is a luxury, Sarah. Survival, success, those are necessities. He was only a few feet away now. I could smell the faint, metallic tang on him again, stronger this time. I knew you wouldn't understand. You live in your perfect little bubble, tending your roses, pretending the world isn't harsh and cruel. And you contribute to that cruelty, I shot back, finding a spark of defiance amidst the fear. He stopped, his eyes hardening. Perhaps, but now you know. And that presents a problem, doesn't it? He tilted his head, studying me as if I were one of his specimens on the table. What am I going to do with you, Sarah? The question hung in the air, heavy and menacing. What am I going to do with you, Sarah? It wasn't a question seeking an answer. It was a threat, cold and calculated. The last vestiges of the husband I thought I knew vanished, replaced entirely by the monster standing before me. My mind raced, fueled by adrenaline and terror. He wouldn't let me walk out of here, knowing his secret. He couldn't afford to. His comfortable life, his freedom, it all depended on my silence. And Ben, the pragmatist, the man who saw morality as a luxury, wouldn't hesitate to ensure that silence was permanent. Ben, please, I pleaded, trying to buy time, trying to appeal to any shred of humanity that might remain. We can figure this out. I won't tell anyone, I swear. We can just forget this ever happened. He laughed, a dry, rattling sound devoid of any humor. Forget? Oh, Sarah, you're more naive than I thought. There's no forgetting this. You've seen behind the curtain. You know what I am. He took another step closer, his eyes scanning the workshop, perhaps assessing potential weapons, or perhaps planning his next move. My own eyes darted around, desperately searching for an escape route, an advantage. The door was behind him. The windows were small, high up, the tools on the pegboard. Maybe? Why, Ben? I asked, trying to keep him talking, stalling for time. Why risk everything for this? Why? He paused, a flicker of something almost like pride crossing his face. Because I could. Because it was easy. Because the world is full of sheep waiting to be fleeced, and organs waiting to be harvested. It's power, Sarah. Control. Something you wouldn't understand. He gestured towards the steel table. This, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. This is where I feel truly alive. The precision, the control, it's exhilarating. His detachment, His clinical fascination with the grotesque solidified my resolve. There was no reasoning with him, no appealing to his conscience. This was a fight for survival. As he momentarily glanced towards the table, reveling in his monstrous confession, I saw my chance. My eyes locked onto a heavy wrench hanging on the pegboard near me. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. In a single, desperate motion, I lunged for the wrench, yanking it from its hook just as Ben turned back, alerted by my sudden movement. Surprise registered on his face, quickly followed by cold fury. "Don't be stupid, Sarah," he snarled, advancing towards me. "Stay back, Ben," I yelled, brandishing the heavy wrench, my hands shaking but my grip firm. "Don't come any closer." He hesitated for a split second, perhaps surprised by my defiance. Then he lunged. I reacted instinctively, swinging the wrench wildly. It connected with his shoulder with a sickening thud. He stumbled back, roaring in pain and rage, clutching his arm. But he wasn't down. If anything, the blow seemed to fuel his fury. He came at me again, faster this time, his eyes burning with murderous intent. I dodged sideways, narrowly avoiding his grasping hands. He crashed into the pegboard, sending tools clattering to the floor. I scrambled backwards, putting the steel table between us. "Get away from me," I screamed. "You should have stayed out of it, Sarah," he yelled, circling the table, his injured shoulder barely slowing him down. "You should have just tended your roses." He lunged across the table, trying to grab me. I sidestepped again, grabbing one of the scalpels that had fallen to the floor. It felt small and inadequate in my hand, but the sharp blade offered a desperate hope. "I mean it, Ben. Stay back." I held the scalpel out, the blade glinting menacingly in the dim light. He paused, eyeing the scalpel, then me. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Using my own tools against me? How fitting. He didn't lunge this time. Instead, he moved slowly, deliberately, circling the table again, trying to corner me. My back hit the cold metal of the freezer. Trapped again. "It's over, Sarah," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle, which was somehow more terrifying than his rage. "Just make this easy on both of us." He took a final step forward, reaching for me. Just as his fingers were about to close around my arm, a deafening crash echoed from outside, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Ben froze, his head snapping towards the workshop door. Someone was breaking in. The sound of shattering glass and splintering wood ripped through the tense standoff. Ben spun around, momentarily distracted, his focus shifting from me to the new, unexpected threat at the door. That split second was all I needed. Adrenaline surged through me, overriding fear. While his back was turned, I shoved past him, scrambling away from the freezer, putting distance between us. I didn't stop to see who was breaking in. My only thought was escape. The workshop door burst inwards, revealing not the police, as I might have desperately hoped, but two figures. The burly, rough-looking man from the video I'd seen on Ben's laptop, and another, equally menacing individual. They stormed in, their eyes immediately locking onto Ben. "Ben, you idiot!" the burly man roared, his voice rough gravel. "What did we tell you about loose ends?" Ben stared at them, his face paling, his earlier predatory confidence evaporating, replaced by raw panic. "She doesn't know anything," he yelled, gesturing frantically towards me. "She stumbled in here by accident. I was handling it." "Handling it?" the second man sneered, stepping further into the workshop, his gaze sweeping over the steel table, the freezer, the containers. "Looks like you made a bigger mess, as usual. Boss isn't happy, Ben. Not happy at all." Boss? So Ben wasn't even the mastermind? He was just a cog, albeit a crucial one, in a larger, more sinister machine. These men weren't here to rescue me. They were here to clean up Ben's mess, and I was now part of that mess. While the intruders confronted Ben, I saw my chance. The door was open. Freedom was just feet away. I bolted. "Hey, stop her!" the burly man yelled. I didn't look back. I burst out of the workshop and into the blinding sunlight, sprinting across the lawn, towards the safety of the house, towards the phone, towards calling for help. Behind me, I heard shouts, the sounds of a struggle, a heavy thud, then an eerie silence. I didn't dare look back. I fumbled with the back door key, my hands shaking uncontrollably, finally managing to unlock it and stumble inside, slamming and locking it behind me. My lungs burned. My body trembled. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, listening intently. Silence from the workshop. Had they subdued Ben? Were they coming after me next? I scrambled for my cell phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed 911. "Police," I choked out when the operator answered. "My husband, workshop, organs, men, breaking in." The words tumbled out in a jumbled, panicked stream. I gave them the address, repeating it frantically, begging them to hurry. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. Hope surged through me. Help was coming. Then I heard footsteps on the back porch. Heavy, deliberate. They weren't Ben's footsteps. They were testing the locked door. I backed away, grabbing a heavy lamp from the end table, holding it like a weapon. The doorknob rattled violently, then a heavy impact against the wood. They were trying to break it down. The sirens were deafeningly close now. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The pounding on the door stopped. I heard muffled shouts from outside, orders being given. Seconds later, the back door burst open again. But this time, it was uniformed police officers, guns drawn. They swept through the house, securing the premises, their calm professionalism a stark contrast to the terror I felt. "Ma'am, are you all right?" a kind-faced officer asked, gently taking the lamp from my trembling hands. I could only nod, tears streaming down my face, relief washing over me in waves so intense they left me weak. The aftermath was a blur. Police swarmed the property, securing the workshop, collecting evidence. Ben was found inside, bound and gagged, but alive. The two intruders were gone, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. The containers of organs, the tools, the freezer, everything was documented, photographed, bagged. Ben, stripped of his facade, confessed everything. He wasn't the mastermind, merely a skilled surgeon who had gotten involved with a dangerous international organ trafficking ring years ago. He performed the illicit removals, preserved the organs, and prepared them for transport, all under the direction of a shadowy boss he claimed never to have met directly. The men who broke in were enforcers, sent to eliminate him after he became a liability, likely because he'd let me discover the truth. My testimony, coupled with the evidence from the workshop and Ben's confession, led to a series of arrests within the trafficking ring, though the ultimate boss remained elusive. Ben received a long prison sentence, his fall from grace spectacular and complete. Our perfect house, tainted by the horrors it had concealed, was sold. I moved away, seeking anonymity and peace far from the manicured lawns and hidden darkness of that suburban nightmare. The scars remained, the fear, the betrayal, the chilling memory of what I saw through the window. But I had survived. I had faced the monster hiding in plain sight and emerged, shaken but whole. Life would never be the same, the illusion of safety shattered forever. But in uncovering the unbelievable truth, I had also uncovered my own strength, a resilience I never knew I possessed. And that, in the end, was the only transformation that truly mattered. The end.